In this presentation, I'm going to share a bit of my personal and historical background. And I do this because getting into a presentation such as tribal relations requires a bit of perspective shifting. Tribes and tribal members have a deep-rooted mistrust when it comes to working with the state or federal entities. And as much as I would like to assume that people have the base knowledge of tribal history, we all know there's systematic issues occurring in ongoing battles right now in truth telling when it comes to this country's history. So we don't get to learn about tribes or tribal history in school, aside from some of the fables of Thanksgiving. Um, but there is a deep historical trauma that generations of tribal members and descendants face today. My people faced starvation, disease, war, and forced assimilation via boarding schools. In fact, I actually had a great uncle that quite literally cannot be found today. And my best assumption is that he is in an unmarked grave somewhere in this state after leaving to boarding school and never returning home to his family. He was roughly the age of my son that you see here in blue in this picture. And today's his birthday, actually. He just turned 12. So we get to go celebrate his birthday this evening. Um, and then my daughter is right in front of him there. And if we were talking historical context, she probably would have been taken as well and never been able to participate in the feast that we get to attend every year or several times a year to honor our foods at the Longhouse together as a family. This type of disconnection of family isn't easy to forgive or forget, nor should it be. But we now have the opportunity to right some wrongs and assure that lasting damage doesn't happen again. So I know that was kind of a heavy intro, and I hope you hold that information with care as we move forward in this training. I think most of you have met me in some capacity. Sorry. I am enrolled with the Yakima Nation, Klickitat Band. I have deep ties to Puyallup, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Siletz tribes. And by identifying my band, you're learning that my family is from the Columbia River area, and I come from a family of fishermen. Much of my family in previous generations lived in the White Salmon area near the Columbia River. However, my immediate family today has been domiciled in the Toppenish or Sadis area. And I'll share more on why that's important in some later slides. I recently completed my MLS at ASU School of Law, where I was lucky enough to study various case law from all over the nation and learn about other tribes in that process. And I have been an artist in community for some time. My grandmothers have been bead workers and basket weavers for a long time. So my background is actually one of my grandma's Klickitat baskets. And my mom passed the beadwork onto me, and that's been one of my good hobbies lately. And then finally, my work with Washington's courts has given me a good advantage in being able to share with you today as I have traveled to various courts throughout the state at different tribes. And during those visits, I usually engage with their cultural center or museum. And I think that's something that every person should do when they visit a new area is see if there's a cultural center nearby. It helps demonstrate your appreciation, your interest, and contributes to the tribe's economic development. Go ahead and hit the next slide. Okay, so today we will review some of the legislation and policy that shape tribal relations, touch on tribes in Washington state with a very short overview of tribal sovereignty, and close it off with a thoughtful and intentional partnership with tribes. And just there's this disclaimer on the right, just to let you know that I am solely presenting from my perspective, and I'm not representing an official position from a specific tribe or government. And in any work going forward, you are strongly encouraged to research and consult with the tribe you are conducting work with specifically to understand their history, customs, values, and traditions. Next slide. Okay. First off, we have what is known as the Centennial Accord. What is it and why is it important? The Centennial Accord was a document signed in 1989 by, at the time, 26 federally recognized tribes. And this was put in place to provide for respectful and cooperative interactions between state and tribes. And this was done as a response to the Bolt decision in 1974, which affirmed tribal fishing rights and required co-management between the state and tribes. I've also included on the resource slide that Bolt decision reading. It is 120 pages, so if you don't feel like reading that, there's a 3-minute video that kind of highlights what the Bolt decision was and its importance. So that's there at the end as well. But yeah, the Centennial Accord brings together tribes and the governor each year to update and discuss pressing topics and enhance collaboration. And the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs, also known as GOIA, is charged with arranging the meeting. This year, legislation actually passed right there in the parentheses, SB 6034, establishing GOIA as an official cabinet agency. I believe it was formerly functioning from executive order. All right. The Centennial Accord was codified through RCW in 2012, which outlines duties, appointments.
Hey, sorry, yes. I had it muted, but Allison has a question for you quickly.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
At the beginning of the slide, you mentioned that at the time in the 80s, there were, I think you said 26 tribes that signed onto it. Current day, my understanding is there are tribes in the state that are federally recognized in those later years. Are all tribes allowed to participate, or how has that evolved to include everyone?
Yeah, so they are allowed to participate if they wish. There are tribes that do not sign on to the Centennial Accord. I know my tribe in Yakima was one of those. We did not sign on. So yeah, it was left up to them how they wanted that relationship to be established.
Thank you.
Yep. Let's see here. Yeah, RCW. And you can see I just took a little clip right there outlining those major areas regarding appointment of a state agency tribal liaison and those training requirements by statute. And then this past year, of course, Governor Bob Ferguson issued Executive Order 2510, strengthening governmental relationship with tribes. And this was doubling down on the importance of strong state and tribal relations, as well as ensuring meaningful discussions, engagements, consultations, and recognitions. I take part in the Sovereign BRG as well, and we're so excited when this executive order came out, and we're still doing ongoing discussions about its importance. Next slide, please. Perfect. This was one of my first tasks that I was assigned coming into the commission. It felt great to be able to create some new guidelines here. And I hope you've gotten a chance to review the policy. It's about 2 pages roughly, and it focuses in on 3 distinct areas that will assist the commission in upholding some of those standards we just mentioned. One area under the core principle sections includes receiving training on the unique history, legal status, and contemporary realities of tribes of Washington State. And look, it's already at work because I'm here with you today. So I hope you guys get to learn a lot. But yeah, the policy outlines the state's duty to consult with tribal stakeholders when actions may affect tribal governments' rights, cultures, resources, or communities. We also outline the consultation process and follow up after consultation. So the work doesn't just stop completely. There's always have to be following steps. You'll see bits and pieces of this policy sprinkled through the presentation. And yeah, I think that's it for this slide. Next slide, please. Okay, getting into it, let's talk about tribes in Washington. There are currently 29 federally recognized tribes. We have 3 non-federally recognized tribes, the Duwamish, Wanapum, and Chinook. And then there are 3 tribes along the Washington boundary: Warm Springs, Nez Perce, and Umatilla. I like to mention these tribes because before we were a state, there were no boundaries. We shared water, we shared land areas, especially certain ceded lands. And so there's always crossover. As you can see, majority of the tribes can be seen on the western side of the state, and your larger, more land-dominant tribes are located on the eastern side. Colville and Yakima have approximately 10,000 members each, whereas the smallest tribe has almost 400 members. And extra points if you know how many tribes and bands make up the Yakima Nation. It's 14. Before treaties, these tribes and bands were separate, and we were all consolidated for ease and convenience. Similarly in Colville. Earlier, I mentioned that I identify under the Klickitat band. However, my ancestors and others were migratory, moving with the harvest and change of seasons. So you can see here on this white map that those boundaries are a little bit different than our reservation boundaries. That land that you see on the white map is reserved for cultural use and expands beyond those boundaries. So fishing, hunting, picking berries, we are able to do that in certain areas outside of the boundaries of our reservation. Understanding where you are and whose footprints were there is important, especially when you have intentions to work in certain regions. Next slide, please. Okay. We could take a whole day on this, but I'm going to fly through this. Tribes have a very unique relationship with both the U.S. federal government and the state government. And one thing I want to emphasize is that tribal sovereignty existed long before the government came into the picture. It was something that's retained and not granted. So tribal sovereignty can be defined as referring to the inherent authority of indigenous tribes to govern themselves, recognized by the U.S. government and protected by treaties and constitutional provisions. Each tribe has their own laws, constitution, tribal elections, and infrastructure. Tribes will implement based upon their own unique needs for their people. I really want to stress that last sentence. It might sound a bit rough to some, but I will always have to emphasize this when it comes to tribal relations, that we are not the heroes and tribes do not need to be saved. That thought process is how boarding schools and wars started. In fact, it wasn't long ago that many groups came in claiming they knew what was best for Indian country, projecting their ideals and solutions, only to fail because they didn't understand the unique nature of each of these tribes. The solutions typically already lie within the community, so it's crucial to be respectful of the tribe's sovereignty and develop intentional engagement. One interesting thing to do when you catch some time is to Google nearby tribes and click on their page that they have and see how they define tribal sovereignty, because they will usually differ. Next slide, please. Elected leadership. Okay, so up to this point, we know about areas of land and the importance of acknowledging sovereignty. And right now, we're going to learn how tribal leadership plays an important role in upholding all of this. Tribal leaders have a very hard job. My father, Virgil, is pictured here, and he sat on tribal council for about 18 years. And I'm so proud of the work he's done. My tribal leadership in Yakima consists of 14 members representing those 14 tribes and bands. And each member is placed into a committee of specialization. So for example, when I hosted an event at Yakima, I approached both the Law and Order Committee and the Tribal Council Executive Committee for approval. And with that contact, I made sure to be respectful in my request. And then, of course, found a way to give back to their community. And that was by hosting something where So if you don't know what I do, I work with judges, state court judges, and tribal court judges. And oftentimes when we visit a tribal court, it's to give our state courts a little bit of perspective into that tribe. And so we make sure that we build education around that and find ways that we can contribute back to them. But this is important because let's say we wanted to conduct a survey on maternal health care in rural tribes such as Yakima. Yes, it might be approved easily through technical staff that we're working with, but also there might be concerns regarding long-term implications of that information or legal standing information sneaking in. Then it would get referred to leadership to approve, which means it would follow up this chain. And it may seem like common knowledge. I put the titles here because, believe it or not, you'd be amazed how many people have disregarded these titles completely. These leaders are elected by their full membership to be in their positions. And if we go ahead to the next slide, I have an example of the Colville org chart, and this was from their public website. And you can see how their government works here. You see tribal leadership is classified as a Colville Business Council, which oversees an executive director, which then oversees each program. If something comes back that's of great importance, it goes back all the way to the top to the entire membership, who will vote usually on the issue. Okay. All tribes are not organized this way, and oftentimes will have a different org chart based on the size and capacity of their tribe. And I share this with you today because in today's world, we work at the speed of light. Everything is expected today. And you might make an inquiry that will take time to run up this chain for approval. These tribal leaders were elected first and foremost to assure that their tribes are taken care of. And many of these elected leaders are also traditional leaders first, and will be attending ceremonies. Their time will be allocated to their members. So make sure your requests are made far in advance and consistently followed up on. I always like to stress an important note for when we work with tribes is that they typically have general council membership meetings in the late fall to early winters. So any requests that go at that time are usually the hardest ones to get answers from. Leaderships are usually required to attend those and all sessions. Next slide, please. Okay, data. I mentioned surveys as an example, and our policy mentions data collection. So I want to make sure we are prepared to handle any data collection in a respectful and reciprocal way. Currently, we see issues with systematic undercountings, inaccuracies, and total exclusion from data gathering, which can lead to extensive resource loss in small communities, especially. So we want to be careful and emphasize collaboration in this area. I highlight the Barrow alcohol study on the right-hand side because the story is just the worst. Researchers went into the Inupiat of Barrow, and I think today they're known as the Utqiagvik in Alaska. In this study, they interviewed only 10% of the population and determined that 72% of the populations were alcoholics. And they ran that story claiming the community was committing suicide with alcohol by fueling high rates of violence and death. Community members were humiliated and stigmatized, not just in Alaska, but nationally. And the community was never presented with the preliminary results or provided an opportunity to comment on the design of the study or research results. Tribes should own and control the collection, ownership, and use of their own data. You can see the elements of data sovereignty in this chart here with the yellow, starting from collection, management, storage, and application. And one recent movement that's been happening with tribes is creating data sharing and security agreements with whoever they're partnering with. The Yurok tribe recently have had one and implemented one, which I've linked in resources at the end. And it's a great step for assuring that the state is taking appropriate measures and thoroughly consulting with the tribes from start to finish and doing it in writing. Right. Next slide, please. All right. So finally, creating thoughtful and intentional partnership does start with affirming and understanding tribal sovereignty, respecting time. Most tribal leaders and judicial officers, even technical staff, are very under budgeted and they don't have enough employees within their own departments to be able to do a lot with what little they have. So assuring that we are going in prepared and assuring that we have all the information that they need so that their time is valued. One thing, let's see here. I'm going to skip over that just because I don't think. Okay. And finally, when I asked my father what qualities he was looking for when building a strong working relationship with outside entities, he mentioned that creating an honest, sincere bond and a willingness to work openly and mutually with each other were defining factors. Like any relationship, good relationship, there is give and take. So there has to be balance. And I think that's all I had. I know I'm running out on time here. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this condensed presentation. I've included a resource and link page for you to explore at the end, and I highly recommend viewing the video links. There's even a video module in there that will walk you through Indian Country 101 and kind of it's a really fun piece and give you good insight.